Hello world, and welcome back to part 2 of this series where I'm going to be creating a podcast monitoring tool. Last time I did a basic project setup and grabbed some resources for this. This time we're going to try to get into some coding. So last time we created this JSON file to hold the main podcast feed and the sub podcast feeds. The intention of this tool is that it's going to essentially monitor these RSS feeds, and when it finds podcasts that are uploaded to these sub feeds but aren't on the main feed, it's going to tweet at the podcasts and let them know that they haven't made it onto the main feed yet. Last time I was collecting these RSS feeds and I wasn't able to find the feeds for these two podcasts. Afterwards, I went and instead of, I used the same tool, but instead of searching for the name, I was able to use the podcast host and find the RSS feed. So I added these in here. Like I said, this time we're going to want to get into some coding. First thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create a markdown file. That's going to be used to track the work and the future tasks that need to be done for this. So therefore, as tasks kind of come in, I can write them down, and then we can go ahead and use that to kind of track what's going on and complete things as we go. Then we're going to get into some coding in Python. First things first, going to create a script that will read this JSON file and grab these URLs. Then we're going to go ahead and create another script that will make a web request for these URLs to collect the data, which is XML data. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end to throw together a XML reader that can kind of read the data from these RSS feeds. I'm going to do all of it in kind of a prototyping fashion, just kind of throwing together some stuff to get it working, and then in the future we'll go in and we use those prototypes and kind of take a tracer approach and get something end to end kind of working that will read RSS feeds, get the data, and then take some actions on it. So with that said, let's get started. First thing I didn't commit this the updates that I made to the JSON file that I made after that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of commit that in. So two ways to do this in Visual Studio is you have a source control here, which can be used to kind of see the changes you made. And when you do that, you'll kind of get a nice little diff of this is what is currently in the main branch, and this is the edit that I made. And then in here, you can add a commit message and use this to commit. The other way you can do it is using the command line. So if I open up the command line here, I'm going to switch over to CMD instead of PowerShell. And if I type git status, it's going to show me the file that's edited. So it shows me that I modified this. And then if I type git diff, it'll show me what changes I made. So similar to the other, it shows me here that I edited these two. So now I'm going to want to commit it. So the first thing I want to check out is the log I have. So far, I only have 3 commits. The first commit initialized the repo, then we created this file, and then we filled in the data. So I'm just going to commit this, added final to RSS feed, I'm going to go final to podcast feeds. I'm going to add a possessive there. All right, so I commit that, and now what you'll see is if I type git status, so you notice that the went away up here. This had been marked previously with an M for modified, and now if I type git status, I don't have anything there. So now we have kind of this clean working space. So like I said, first thing I want to actually do is I'm going to create a markdown file. I'm going to call it just work tracker. And I'm just going to say in here, so I personally, with my work, I use ADO, Azure DevOps, and so they have a concept of scenarios, deliverables, and tasks, where tasks are kind of the low work element. You bundle them up into a deliverable, one simple thing to deliver, and then a bunch of delivers together create a scenario. So in this case, I'm going to use the same terminology here for this, as it's just kind of what I use. A lot of places will kind of use tickets and other things, which is, it's all very the same. It's just kind of, there's no real difference in what you're doing there. So I'm going to use the kind of deliverable task concept. And so first things first, I'm going to assume scenario for this is to create the podcast monitor and kind of stand that up. So I'm going to start here, deliverables. And so in markdown, right, this kind of creates a heading, and then I'm going to create a table. And so let's say, we'll have an ID, we'll have a name, and then we'll have a status, where status, let's say, is open, in progress, and completed. So as far as deliverables go, like I said, the main things that we want to do is kind of prototype out the different code. And so in this case, we have two options. We could either say each one of those is a deliverable, or one deliverable is to prototype the code. So I'm going to start with that. And so I'm going to say, we'll give it, so to create a table, the next thing I want to do is I want to basically create that. So that makes the first line a header. And now I'm going to use 3 digits just to keep things consistent. And so we'll have 1 be this first one. I'm going to use the same IDs for deliverables and work items. I could obviously use kind of different numbers for them, but this way the unique IDs are for each unit of work are the same. So I'm going to prototype. So in this case, what am I doing? I'm prototyping the reading of RSS feeds. So I'll just call it that. And since we're going to start this today, I'm just going to immediately say that's in progress. And then I'm going to actually create some tasks. And now I guess there's 2 ways to do this. I could do the tasks where there's kind of like a parent column, or I could do the tasks where I say, okay, the tasks for this are, kind of do like a for 001 and then create a table here for that, or I could do it just in the table itself. I'm going to use the in a table itself, and that's more of kind of a database kind of concept there. So I'm going to say ID, parent ID. Now, obviously, I probably want a parent ID in the deliverables if I had more than one scenario, but for now, it's going to be fine. Name and status. And so here, we're going to have 002, 001, and the name for this one, I forgot actually to add in the header. And so for the name for this one, we'll say, so because it's the parent, like I could either explicitly say that it's a prototype, or because it's part of prototyping, I could say it's not. But in this case, I'm just going to say it's part of a prototype because there's not a great like visualization tool here. So I'm going to say prototype JSON reader. Now, obviously, I probably want to have some method of including more details, but for now, all of this is probably pretty good. And I'm just going to say open for this. So now I'm just going to create a couple more copies of this so I can create a 3 and a 4. In this case, the other things I need to prototype is web requests and then XML reader. And then I'm going to start with this one, so I'm just going to move this to in progress. So one nice thing about creating something in Markdown is I can actually visualize this. If I right click on here and I go to open preview, it's going to actually open this up here. So I actually get a nice kind of visualization of this. And so just as a quick example, right, if I forgotten to do that, you see that it doesn't recognize that it's a table and kind of makes it messy. And the other thing I can do is I can obviously update these and say, right, if I want to revert this to open, right, it just reflects. And it does it basically on the save of the file. So that's kind of a nice way to kind of visualize what we're doing. So we're going to start here with this prototyping of the RSS feeds, and we're going to start with the first task 2, prototype the JSON reader. Now before I do that, I'm just going to also commit this. So you'll see here, if I check the status, I have this new work tracker, but I probably don't want to actually commit this as a go. Now, obviously I could use this as another method, but I already have Git that essentially is tracking like the actual work I'm committing and the actual changes that I'm making. So I'm actually going to ignore this file. So along with the venv, I'm going to kind of come in here and say I'm going to ignore worktracker.md. So now if I type git status, you're going to see that the work tracker is gone, and now my git ignore was changed by adding this in. So I'm going to commit it and say added work tracker.md to git ignore. All right. And I'm actually going to, not in this one, but in the future, after I kind of get us a few of these prototypes, I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually add tags to this to make it kind of look a little better. But for now, we're going to skip that, and now we're going to actually get into some coding, because it's been a total of 33 minutes, something like that, with the last minute being 30 of me not actually doing any coding. So I want to actually get into some coding. So let's create a file, and we'll just call it JSON reader. And like I said, obviously we're doing this in Python. Now, like any good programmer, I don't memorize how to do JSON reading. What I do is I look it up, and you take what you know how to do and you adapt it to doing the thing you want it to do. So I'm going to switch my screens here, and simplest way to do this, Python JSON read. What about reader? Let's go with that. All right, great. So basically, you know, often when you're coding something, I'm not going to necessarily memorize that I need JSON load or anything kind of like simple. I'm just going to kind of look it up and then just adapt it to what I need to do, because I can assume this works. Personally, I find Geeks for Geeks to be a really good website for kind of the basic stuff like this. It's very clear. In this case, I actually don't even need to go to the website, because this is actually enough information. But if I were to kind of open this up here, right, if I was interested in, okay, how do I read a JSON file? I can kind of scroll through, and it gives text and information, but I personally just like, you know, kind of code snippets. And this kind of has a few different code snippets that are super helpful with what we're doing here. So I'm going to come back here and just use this directly. So to do this, right, first thing we need to do is we need to import JSON. Now, the main function that we're going to use from JSON is actually a function called load, which will take textual data that is written in JSON. Or actually, in this case, I guess it takes a file that's written in JSON. I should probably switch this back. So in this case, right, let me just, I guess, do this talking on this first, and then I'll actually code it. So import JSON, right, this is a file read. I'm going to actually wrap this up in some exception kind of handling. And then it does a JSON load after it, and then that gets the data here. And as you can see, the data is actually like a dictionary type in Python. In this case, that's a list of things. So personally, what I like to do is I like to use the from import. So instead of saying import JSON and then doing JSON.load, I prefer to just say from JSON import load and then just kind of use it, the various methods that I need. If it can get like cumbersome depending on exactly how you're doing it, but if you're keeping your module small, I kind of like it that way. So let's switch back over here. So instead of doing import JSON, I'm actually going to do from JSON import load. Okay, and so now I need to read in the file. And so in this case, what they have is they have something like file.open and then feeds.json. And the assumption, so I could then either add a read, or I don't have to because it's automatically assumed if it's a read, and for write you have to add that. So I'm not going to be explicit necessarily on this. Now, the problem with this is afterwards I need to do an f.close when I'm done with the file. And if an exception happens, you might not get the f.close. So the better way to do this is to say with as f, and then I don't need to do this, but inside here I can do f dot say read, and then when we exit the context of this open, the file will automatically close. So we don't need to worry about all that exception handling. In this case, instead of doing f.read, which would create a string that then I think we could load to. I think load is probably overloaded with both of those. I'm just going to say data equals load f. Now here's another kind of thing that I personally do, and I know is unPythonic. So if people who are big Python fans end up watching this, they're going to hate me. But personally, if it's something like this, I just like to do it this way as opposed to putting it on a new line. If it's something as simple as a kind of one-line thing, I do it with ifs as well, where instead of saying if true, run function, right? Personally, I just like to do it like that. I think it reads pretty clean that way, and it kind of is more compact and easier to digest in my personal opinion. And again, it's unPythonic, so people would say, well, in their personal opinion, or also because Python should be written this way, they would disagree, but this is my code and I will do what I want. So now we have this, which reads in the JSON. So let's take a quick look at this JSON file, right? What do we have here? We have this JSON file is a list of dictionaries. So data should be a list. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to let's just run through this in kind of like a piecewise thing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to print the type of data to start with, actually. So now I'm going to come down here. Now remember, we set up a virtual environment for this. So I have to, before I actually start running code, I need to turn it on. So I need to open up VNV, go to scripts, activate. That'll open up my virtual environment. Now, if you'll remember, we haven't actually, since we haven't done any Python yet, coding yet, there is no live modules that I've loaded in. In this case, we probably won't end up having any modules that kind of get loaded in, simply because the modules that I'm using for this, the JSON, the web request, and the XML are all very kind of basic, and they're kind of already included with Python. So now that we've got this here, let's just run the JSON reader. So just do Python run, and now you see that it's a list, which is what we expected. And because we can also print out the actual data, and we'll see that it's basically all this junk here with all this. So because this is kind of a prototype, and all I really care about is getting the kind of various pieces working, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say I just want podcast JSON, and I'm just going to grab the first one because I just want to kind of work on something. So now let's print out this, and what you'll see here is now I have this dictionary which has these 3 elements. If I print out the type of it, we have that there. So we have a dictionary, and these are the elements. So in fact, I'm going to actually simplify, or I'm going to go podcast URL, and that's going to be equal to the podcast JSON, and then the key here, right, is the URL, and that will give me this. So now if I print out podcast URL, I'll just get that data. Because I'm just doing kind of some prototyping here, so basically you can argue that we have now completed the prototype because we are now reading the JSON data, right? And so it's a prototype. All I'm trying to do is get some JSON reading done. We have now accomplished that. So now let's start this one, make a web request. I'm actually going to rename this file because I'm actually just kind of going to write the script in there. Or actually, so instead of script, I'm going to call it prototype because that's what I've been calling everything. So let's just call it prototype. And then what I'll end up doing is after we get done with the prototype and actually start creating these modules, I will then create a JSON reader, and then it will be a class that does this, but won't actually like kind of limit the specifics of what I'm doing. So I'm going to comment that out for now. And now what do we have to do? We have to go on to this one, create a web request. So let's switch back over to this monitor here. And now I'm going to search for Python web request. Okay, so this is actually a new thing I've noticed in Bing. I use Bing because I am an employee. And so they actually looks like they have this kind of nice thing where you can kind of see these little code snippets and you kind of switch between them. So you have your Stack Overflow and your Geeks for Geeks. In this case, Stack Overflow is saying that if I have some URL, I can read it using the URL lib2 library, and I can get the contents using this. I can also use this HTTP lib module, create a connection, make a request, get a response. Now, because I'm doing some basic stuff, I'm actually going to use the request library. And again, I'm going to use Geeks for Geeks for this. So this is very simple. Given this URL, request.get, and then that's the result, and then the result.content. So this is going to be fairly simple to do. So let's switch back over here. I'm going to do the same thing I did kind of up top, where I use this kind of construct of from this thing. So I'm going to go from requests, import, get. So it's possible that we're going to have to use our first little pip installation if this is not part of the library. And actually, before I do this, I'm going to back up a little bit. So before I do this, I'm going to actually commit this as well. Got to get into a better habit of committing things. So now, because it's the first thing, I have to do a git add first, git status, git commit. For JSON reader. So now I'm going to add this stuff back in here. I'm going to go from requests, import, get. Now let's check this out. Let's see if we need to actually import some. So let's go Python, and then run the prototype. Okay, so see, request was not found. So how do we resolve this? Well, we install it. So let's just install. So that's pip requests. Oh, pip install, obviously. I skipped it in as I was saying it, which made no sense. So there you go. Now what you'll notice is that if I type pip freeze, I actually get all these libraries. So it actually includes, right? So if you remember, the one thing said I could use URL lib2. There's actually now a URL lib3 that requests uses, and these other things that kind of go along with it. So one thing I want to do is I want to make sure I save these in a requirements file. That way, if say someone else wants to load in this project, they can just actually go pip install and point to that file, and they will actually then install everything. I'm going to, I might demonstrate kind of how that works in another later video. But for now, I'm going to go pip freeze, and I'm going to go pip freeze, and I'm going to pipe it into a requirements I think there's an E there. .txt. Oh, I already have the requirements.txt. See, I did the same thing I think last time where I was getting confused with spelling. So let's pip freeze in there, and now what you'll notice is this requirements.txt has been updated with the new modules that I need to install. So now, if I go back and I run this, everything runs fine. So let's actually do the web request. So basically, very simple. The results get podcast URL. RSS content equals, or let's just go RSS data. You can somewhat consistent, I guess. Result dot content, and that is not a method. Is it? So now, just real quick, check out what type of the data that we're going with here. So we're in bytes. And now let's see if I print this out. That is long. I'm going to cancel this. Okay, let's just close this out. Okay, open back up another one. Okay, well, same one. So, instead what I'm going to do to kind of check out what the data looks like, wrap it in a string, and then I'm only going to print out the first 200 characters. Do a quick splice. All right, great. So if you're familiar with, so we can actually open up, so let's add this back in. Print out both of them. So here, what we're going to do is, let's open up this feed. All right, I'm just going to copy and paste it, so that way I can switch over to the monitor properly. So let's open up this other monitor, and we'll come in here. And this is the data. So as you can kind of see here, you have the XML kind of schemas and stuff. You have the media, and then you have this channel along with links, various copyright descriptions, yada yada yada, and some kind of ownership. So switching back to this first one, you kind of see the start of it here. I'm actually going to print out a little bit more of this. So let's just go 800. So that's obviously the first 800 characters. And now you can kind of see, yeah, you have these various schemas and stuff, or whatever they are, content, description, yada, yada, yada. So we now have that data. So now the next thing to do is going to be creating the next thing we're going to do is actually kind of interpret and process this data. So I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to just kind of clean this up slightly. And I'm going to come over to this work tracker. So we've now completed this prototype. And the next thing we're going to do is this XML reader. We're about 30 minutes in. I'm going to have to kind of go. So, have a good Sunday. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of commit these changes and stuff. And then next time we'll actually get into the XML reader. And then probably start turning this kind of prototype into kind of actual better classes and stuff. So what do we have? We have these requirements and the prototype. Check out the diff here. So we just updated both of them with that. And so we'll check out the log one more time. So we'll say git commit create prototype code for wow, we'll go create prototype code for the web request. All right, so now we're kind of all clean with everything we're doing here. So let's kind of just do a quick recap of what we did this time. So first thing, created this. I'm gonna remove this git ignore for now because as we run maybe more Python stuff and added more resources, we might need to add stuff in here, but we don't need that as much. I'm gonna move this work track and preview over here. I'm gonna pin these in since this is kind of what we're using to do everything. Requirements, similarly, we'll only need it when we're adding in more modules, so I'm getting rid of that. And as of now, I'm actually reading in this data, so I'm going to close this out too. So mainly, we're working in this space. So what did we do this time? We created a markdown file to kind of track the work that we're going to be doing. And in this case, we're starting out with some prototyping. We prototyped a JSON some JSON reading and making some web requests. Very simple code, as you can tell. Python kind of makes it very easy in these different sort of modules and stuff. And so this should all be kind of fairly straightforward. It's fairly common to use for different things. And we also obviously demonstrated how, as a software developer, you don't need to obviously memorize any of these things. You can just kind of make a quick, check for what it is. And actually, the key is, right, if you remember for the JSON reader, one of the things they did was they opened the file and then they closed the file, which is what you want to do. But what they didn't talk about, if you were just looking things up, is, hey, you should actually wrap it in this kind of width. So that way, if any exceptions happen, the file definitely gets closed and you're not having these resources that are hanging out there. So that's really the type of thing, that and kind of the skill of turning something in, that you kind of have into a properly formatted class with good structure. It's easy to read. That's kind of really what you want to do as a software developer. So we'll end up kind of getting more into that next time. Sorry that there was a little bit of a lie where we said you'd get into some XML reading, but I did figure it'd be a little bit of a stretch goal unless we kind of went to the 45-minute to an hour mark. So with that, I'm going to leave it there today. And next week should be back online creating the prototype for the XML reader. Hope anyone who ends up watching this kind of gets some good information out of it. And with that, call it a stream. So see ya.